Before Keenen Ivory Wayans launched in living color, he created a blaxploitation parody so bizarre that John Cusack got tortured with 20 explosive squibs for a scene that never made the film. Antonio Fargas wore two 500 per week goldfish platform shoes, and Eddie Murphy accidentally became the movie's uncredited co-creator. From Chris Rock's cheapest customer cameo to a failed TV spin-off starring Martin Lawrence, this comedy classic hides secrets stranger than its gold chain overdose premise. Fact 1. Eddie Murphy co-created the concept. Most people know that Keenen Ivory Wayans wrote and directed I'm Gonna Get You Sucka, but what they don't realize is that the entire concept came from Eddie Murphy's brain during what started as just a regular conversation between two friends in the comedy world. Back in the mid-1980s, Wayans was still working his way up in Hollywood, having spent 5 years building his credentials on projects like Hollywood Shuffle and Eddie Murphy Raw, where he got to work closely with Murphy himself. During one of their casual conversations, Murphy suggested that someone should make a full-length parody of blaxploitation films, those gritty action movies from the 1970s that featured predominantly black casts and over-the-top characters. But Murphy didn't just pitch the general idea, he actually came up with the specific title, I'm Gonna Get You Sucka, right there on the spot, essentially handing Wayans both the concept and the name for what would become his directorial debut. What makes this story even more interesting is that Wayans, being the respectful professional that he was, actually asked Murphy for permission to use both the idea and the title before moving forward with the project. Murphy gave his blessing, essentially allowing Wayans to take what had been Murphy's brainstorm and turn it into his own creative vision. This generous gesture from Murphy helped launch not just this particular film, but Wayans' entire directing career, which would later include In Living Color and numerous other comedy projects. So while Wayans deserves full credit for writing, directing, and starring in the film, the original spark that ignited the whole project came directly from Eddie Murphy's imagination, making Murphy an uncredited co-creator of one of the most beloved blaxploitation parodies ever made. Fact 2. John Cusack's deleted torture scene. Chris Rock's hilarious cameo as the world's cheapest customer in the rib joint scene became one of the most quoted moments from I'm Gonna Get You Sucka, but what audiences didn't know is that Rock's enthusiasm for the food wasn't just acting. Years later, during a Reddit discussion about the film, Rock revealed that he genuinely loved the ribs being served at the actual restaurant location where they filmed the scene, and he spent his time between takes continuing to eat the food even when the cameras weren't rolling. The scene itself features Rock's character trying to negotiate increasingly ridiculous deals with Isaac Hayes' character Hammer, starting with asking for just one rib and then trying to get a sip of soda for 15 cents, before finally asking Hammer to pour the drink directly into his hands for a dime, when told that the cups cost more than 15 cents. Rock's performance in this scene is so natural and convincing that it's easy to believe he really is the type of person who would haggle over every penny, but his genuine enjoyment of the restaurant's food helped him tap into that authentic energy. What makes Rock's off-camera eating even more interesting is that it shows how a young comedian who was still early in his career was professional enough to stay in character and maintain the mood of the scene even during downtime. Rather than breaking the spell by stepping away from the set or chatting about other topics, Rock kept himself immersed in the world of the film by continuing to interact with the food and the environment. This behind-the-scenes detail adds an extra layer of authenticity to what became one of the film's most memorable comedic moments, proving that sometimes the best performances come from actors who find genuine connections to their characters and circumstances. Fact 3. The two 500 goldfish platform shoes. The most memorable visual gag in I'm Gonna Get You Sucka features Antonio Fargas strutting down the street in outrageous 6-inch platform shoes that contain actual live goldfish swimming around in transparent chambers built into the heels. But these weren't just movie props created by the costume department. These incredible shoes were real footwear that belonged to former National Football League player John "Frenchie" Fuqua, who had actually worn them in real life during the height of the 1970s fashion scene, when platform shoes and flashy personal style were at their peak popularity. Fuqua, whose nickname Frenchie came from his flamboyant fashion sense, was known throughout the NFL for his wild outfits and attention-grabbing accessories, with these goldfish platform shoes being perhaps his most famous fashion statement. When the production team for I'm Gonna Get You Sucka learned about these legendary shoes, they knew they had to have them for the film since they perfectly captured the over-the-top style they were trying to parody from blaxploitation movies. However, Fuqua wasn't just going to hand over his prized footwear for free. or even for a small fee. He demanded exactly $2,500 per week to rent out the shoes to the movie production, which was an enormous amount of money considering the film's total budget was only $3 million. This means that for however long they needed those shoes on set, the production was paying what would be equivalent to several $1,000s in today's money just to borrow someone's personal footwear. The shoes became one of the film's most iconic visual elements, with audiences remembering the absurd sight of Fargas walking in goldfish-filled platforms long after they forgot other details from the movie, making Fuqua's expensive rental fee somewhat justified by the lasting impact of his unique fashion creation. Fact 4. Filmed in just 32 days. Making a feature film in 32 days sounds impossible, but that's exactly how long it took Keenen Ivory Wayans to shoot his entire directorial debut, which makes I'm Gonna Get You Sucka one of the fastest major studio productions ever completed. This breakneck filming schedule becomes even more impressive when you consider that Wayans was juggling multiple roles as the film's writer, director, and lead actor, meaning he had to memorize his own lines while also managing every aspect of the production and making sure all the other actors hit their marks. The $3 million budget that United Artists gave Wayans was considered quite small even by 1980s standards, which meant the production couldn't afford to rent locations, hire large crews, or take their time with multiple takes for very long. Every single day of filming had to be carefully planned and executed with military precision because there simply wasn't any room in the schedule or budget for delays, reshoots, or the kind of lengthy rehearsal periods that bigger productions typically enjoy. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that the film managed to earn back its entire production budget within just the first month of its theatrical release, bringing in $3 million before it had even expanded to wide release across the country. This meant that Wayans had not only proven he could direct a feature film under extreme time and budget constraints, but he had also delivered a product that audiences actually wanted to see and were willing to pay for. The 32-day shooting schedule forced everyone involved to work with incredible efficiency and creativity, which may have actually contributed to the film's energetic pace and spontaneous feel that audiences connected with, proving that sometimes limitations can push filmmakers to create something more dynamic than they might have achieved with unlimited time and resources. Fact 5. Chris Rock's improvised restaurant scene. Chris Rock's hilarious cameo as the world's cheapest customer in the rib joint scene became one of the most quoted moments from I'm Gonna Get You Sucka, but what audiences didn't know is that Rock's enthusiasm for the food wasn't just acting. Years later, during a Reddit discussion about the film, Rock revealed that he genuinely loved the ribs being served at the actual restaurant location where they filmed the scene, and he spent his time between takes continuing to eat the food even when the cameras weren't rolling. The scene itself features Rock's character trying to negotiate increasingly ridiculous deals with Isaac Hayes' character, Hammer, starting with asking for just one rib and then trying to get a sip of soda for 15 cents before finally asking Hammer to pour the drink directly into his hands for a dime when told that the cups cost more than 15 cents. Rock's performance in this scene is so natural and convincing that it's easy to believe he really is the type of person who would haggle over every penny, but his genuine enjoyment of the restaurant's food helped him tap into that authentic energy. What makes Rock's off-camera eating even more interesting is that it shows how a young comedian who was still early in his career was professional enough to stay in character and maintain the mood of the scene even during downtime. Rather than breaking the spell by stepping away from the set or chatting about other topics, Rock kept himself immersed in the world of the film by continuing to interact with the food and the environment. This behind-the-scenes detail adds an extra layer of authenticity to what became one of the film's most memorable comedic moments, proving that sometimes the best performances come from actors who find genuine connections to their characters and circumstances. Fact 6. The Wayans family Easter egg. One of the most clever inside jokes in I'm Gonna Get You Sucka happens during a bar scene that most viewers completely miss because it's disguised as casual dialogue, but it's actually a playful family reference that breaks the fourth wall in the most subtle way possible. During this scene, Kim Wayans appears on stage performing for the bar crowd, and one of the characters watching her asks the bartender a simple question about the performer's identity, wanting to know who the woman singing is. The bartender's response is what makes this moment so special, because instead of giving a character name or some made-up backstory, she simply says, "That's the director's sister," which is literally the truth since Kim Wayans is indeed Keenen Ivory Wayans' real-life sister. What makes this moment even more perfect is that immediately after the bartender delivers this line, the camera actually cuts to show Keenen Ivory Wayans himself, essentially pointing directly at the director, as if to confirm that yes, the woman on stage really is his sister. This joke works on multiple levels because audiences who aren't familiar with the Wayans family might think it's just a throwaway line of dialogue, while those who know the family connection get to enjoy the meta-humor of the film, acknowledging its own behind-the-scenes reality. The timing of the camera movement makes it clear that this wasn't an accident or coincidence, but rather a deliberately planned moment where Wayans decided to have some fun with the audience by literally showing them the director right after mentioning him. This type of self-referential humor would become a trademark of Wayans' family productions, but this early example shows that even in his directorial debut, Keenen Ivory Wayans was already experimenting with breaking down the barriers between the movie and the real world in clever and unexpected ways. Fact 7. Fishbone's double movie cameo. The alternative rock band Fishbone had an unusually busy year in 1988 when it came to movie appearances, managing to squeeze 2 different film cameos into their schedule while they were touring and recording music. In I'm Gonna Get You Sucka, the band members appear in not just one scene, but actually 2 completely different roles throughout the film, showing their versatility as both musicians and actors, even though neither appearance required them to speak any dialogue. Their first appearance in the movie comes when Antonio Fargas's character Fly Guy makes his grand entrance wearing his ridiculous pimp outfit complete with the famous goldfish platform shoes, and Fishbone band members can be spotted standing among the crowd of people on the street who start laughing and mocking his over-the-top appearance. This scene works perfectly because the band members' genuine reactions help sell the idea that Fly Guy's 1970s style has become completely ridiculous by the 1980s. Later in the film, Fishbone appears again, but this time in a completely different capacity, serving as a backup band that provides musical accompaniment for one of the characters, similar to how other characters in the movie have their own personal theme music and musicians following them around. This second appearance shows the band actually doing what they do best, which is playing music, rather than just standing around as background extras. What makes 1988 even more remarkable for Fishbone is that they also appeared in another film that same year called Tapeheads, which starred John Cusack and Tim Robbins, where they performed as a band called Ranchbone, and actually contributed music to the film's soundtrack. This means that within the span of just 1 year, Fishbone managed to appear in 2 completely different movies, showcasing their growing popularity in Hollywood's alternative music scene. Fact 8. The failed TV spin-off mystery. 2 years after I'm Gonna Get You Sucka became a hit, ABC Television decided to create a spin-off series called Hammer, Slammer, and Slade that would focus on 3 of the most popular characters from the original film. But the resulting pilot episode became one of the strangest casting experiments in television history. The biggest surprise was that Keenen Ivory Wayans, who had written the pilot and served as executive producer, decided not to appear in the show at all, which meant they needed to find someone else to play his character Jack Spade. The network chose Eric LaSalle, who would later become famous for playing Dr. Peter Benton on the medical drama ER, to take over the role of Jack Spade, creating an unusual situation where the main character from the movie would be played by a completely different actor in the television version. Even more interesting was the casting of Martin Lawrence, who at that time was still a relatively unknown comedian, to play the character Willie, who had been portrayed by Kadeem Hardison in the original film. The pilot also featured some familiar faces returning from the movie, including Isaac Hayes as Hammer, Jim Brown as Slammer, Bernie Casey as Slade, Janet Dubois, and Steve James, which gave the show some continuity with the original film, even though the main character had been recast. Damon Wayans' character Lenny was also recast, with actor Bentley Kyle Evans taking over that role, meaning that several key characters were being played by entirely different people. Despite having both Keenen Ivory Wayans involved behind the scenes and several popular actors from the original film, ABC ultimately decided not to pick up Hammer, Slammer, and Slade for a full series, though the pilot was later shown multiple times in syndication, giving viewers a chance to see what might have been a successful television adaptation of the beloved comedy. Fact 9. Steve James's final Band-Aid moment. The very last scene of I'm Gonna Get You Sucka features what might be the most perfectly timed anticlimax in comedy history. Thanks to Steve James's character Kung Fu Joe, arriving at exactly the wrong moment with exactly the wrong energy for what's actually happening around him. Throughout the entire film, Kung Fu Joe has been built up as this incredibly tough martial arts expert who can handle any dangerous situation, but he gets shot full of holes by police officers earlier in the movie and spends most of the climax slowly crawling his way toward the final battle between the heroes and the villains. By the time Kung Fu Joe finally makes it to the scene of what should be an epic confrontation, the fighting is completely over, and all the bad guys have already been defeated, but he doesn't realize this yet because he's been focused entirely on just getting there. In a moment of pure dramatic irony, he crawls up to a police officer and breathlessly asks where he can find Slade, clearly expecting to jump into some kind of ongoing action sequence that will let him show off his fighting skills and help save the day. When Kung Fu Joe finally understands that he's arrived too late to be useful, he does what any self-respecting action hero would do, and dramatically rips off his shirt while declaring, "Kung Fu Joe is here," in a voice that suggests he's ready to take on an entire army of criminals single-handedly. The police officer has to break the disappointing news that everyone has already left, and the excitement is completely finished, leaving Kung Fu Joe standing there shirtless and pointless. The perfect comedic button on this entire sequence comes when Kung Fu Joe, deflated, and realizing his heroic moment has passed him by, calls after the departing police officer with the most unheroic request possible, asking, "Yo, brother, do you got a band-aid?" which transforms him instantly from action hero to injured person who just needs basic medical attention. Fact 10. The Vintage Costume Challenge. Creating the authentic 1970s look for I'm Gonna Get You Sucka presented costume designer Ruth E. Carter with one of the most difficult challenges of her early career because the film was made during a time when 70s fashion was considered completely outdated and hadn't yet experienced the nostalgic comeback that would make vintage clothing trendy again. Carter, who would later win Academy Awards for her costume work on Black Panther and Coming to America, was tasked with making the actors look exactly like they had stepped out of a blaxploitation film from 15 years earlier. But finding authentic clothing from that era proved nearly impossible. The problem was that by 1988, most people had either thrown away their 70s clothing or hidden it in the back of their closets out of embarrassment, since the wide lapels, bell-bottom pants, and loud patterns that defined the decade were seen as fashion disasters rather than collectible vintage pieces. Thrift stores and costume rental companies didn't have the kind of extensive 70s collections that would become common decades later, which meant Carter couldn't simply go shopping for the clothes she needed. Instead of giving up or settling for approximations, Carter took on the enormous task of recreating authentic 70s fashion from scratch by studying old clothing catalogs and fashion magazines from that era to understand exactly how the garments were constructed, what fabrics were used, and what details would make the costumes look genuinely period-appropriate rather than like modern interpretations of 70s style. This painstaking research process required Carter to essentially become a 70s fashion historian, learning about everything from the specific cuts of pants to the types of buttons and stitching that were popular during the blaxploitation era, then working with seamstresses and tailors to recreate these looks using techniques and materials that would match what audiences would have seen in the original films being parodied. Fact 11. Marlon and Sean's crowd cameos. Long before Marlon Wayans and Sean Wayans became household names through movies like White Chicks and Scary Movie, they got their first taste of being in front of movie cameras by appearing as uncredited extras in their older brother's directorial debut. The scene that features their cameo is one of the film's most memorable visual gags, where Antonio Fargas's character Fly Guy emerges from prison and decides to strut down the street wearing his completely over-the-top pimp outfit from the 1970s, complete with the famous 6-inch goldfish platform shoes and a yellow suit covered in animal print fur. What makes this scene work so well comedically is the genuine reaction from the crowd of people on the street who start pointing and laughing at Fly Guy's ridiculous appearance, making it clear that his once cool style has become completely absurd by the 1980s. Among this crowd of laughing bystanders, sharp-eyed viewers can spot both Marlon and Sean Wayans, who blend in perfectly with the other extras but are actually getting their first experience working on a professional film set. At the time of filming, neither Marlon nor Sean had established themselves as comedic performers in their own right, which means their appearance in this scene represents a true family affair where Keenen Ivory Wayans was giving his younger brothers a chance to be part of his movie-making process. Their laughter and reactions in the scene appear completely natural and spontaneous, which makes sense because they were probably genuinely amused by watching Antonio Fargas perform in such an outrageous costume. This early cameo marked the beginning of what would become a long tradition of Wayans family collaborations, with Marlon and Sean eventually going on to star in their own successful comedy films while maintaining the same kind of irreverent humor that made I'm Gonna Get You Sucka such a memorable parody. Fact 12. The Curtis Mayfield-Fishbone collaboration. One of the most unexpected musical partnerships in film soundtrack history happened when Curtis Mayfield, the legendary soul musician who created iconic songs for blaxploitation classics like Superfly, agreed to work with Fishbone, an alternative rock band from Los Angeles that mixed ska, punk, funk, and metal into their high-energy sound. These two artists came from completely different musical worlds and generations, with Mayfield representing the smooth, socially conscious soul music of the 1970s and Fishbone embodying the chaotic, genre-blending alternative rock scene of the 1980s. The collaboration resulted in a song called He's a Fly Guy, which was created specifically for the I'm Gonna Get You Sucka soundtrack and served as the perfect musical accompaniment for Antonio Fargas's character Fly Guy, the outdated pimp who becomes a laughingstock when he tries to reclaim his former glory. The song needed to capture both the original coolness that Fly Guy once possessed during the blaxploitation era and the ridiculousness of his character trying to maintain that image in a completely different time period. What made this partnership so unusual was that Curtis Mayfield had actually lived through and helped define the musical landscape that I'm Gonna Get You Sucka was parodying, having written and performed songs for actual blaxploitation films during their heyday in the early 1970s. Meanwhile, Fishbone represented a newer generation of musicians who were approaching that same musical heritage from a completely different angle, bringing their own irreverent energy and rock sensibilities to the collaboration. The resulting track perfectly captured the film's tone by combining Mayfield's authentic connection to the blaxploitation genre with Fishbone's modern, satirical approach to music, creating something that honored the original era while also making fun of its excesses in a way that fit perfectly with the movie's comedic goals. Fact 13. Boogie Down Productions meta theme. Hip-hop group Boogie Down Productions made one of the most cleverly self-aware cameos in I'm Gonna Get You Sucka by appearing as themselves playing the theme music for the main character, creating a moment that breaks the fourth wall in the most natural way possible. The concept behind this cameo is that in the world of blaxploitation films, the coolest characters often had their own personal theme songs that would play whenever they appeared on screen, usually performed by unseen musicians or studio recordings. But I'm Gonna Get You Sucka takes this idea to its logical extreme by actually showing the musicians who are creating the music. When Keenen Ivory Wayans' character Jack Spade walks through his neighborhood, Boogie Down Productions can be seen following him around with their instruments, literally providing his soundtrack in real time as if they were his personal backing band. This visual gag works on multiple levels because it acknowledges the artificial nature of movie music while also celebrating the tradition of blaxploitation theme songs that helped define the genre's cool factor during the 1970s. KRS-One, the leader and main rapper of Boogie Down Productions, went beyond just appearing in the film by actually writing and performing a song specifically for Jack Spade's character called I'mo Get You Sucka, which plays off the movie's title while creating a personalized theme that fits the character's role as someone trying to clean up his neighborhood. The song title uses the same deliberately casual grammar as the movie's title, maintaining the film's playful approach to language and style. This collaboration between Boogie Down Productions and the film represents an early example of hip-hop artists contributing original music to movie soundtracks, which would become much more common in later years, but at the time it felt fresh and innovative to have rappers creating character-specific theme songs for comedy films. Fact 14. The Any Ghetto, USA location. The fictional neighborhood called Any Ghetto, USA, that serves as the setting for Jack Spade's hometown was actually created by filming at multiple real Los Angeles locations that were carefully chosen to represent the kind of urban environment that appeared in classic blaxploitation films from the 1970s. Rather than building sets or finding a single location that could serve as the entire neighborhood, the production team decided to use the authentic architecture and atmosphere of various Los Angeles areas to create a composite location that would feel both realistic and appropriately dramatic for the film's parody elements. One of the key filming locations was the Ebony Showcase Theater, located on West Washington Boulevard, which appeared in the scene where Keenen Ivory Wayans goes to the Black Revolutionary headquarters, looking for help in taking back his neighborhood from the villains. The production filmed just outside the theater's entrance, using the building's storefront and surrounding area to create the impression of a community organization that had been active during the civil rights era, but was now struggling to remain relevant in the 1980s. The film also made use of several historic downtown Los Angeles theaters, including the Belasco Theater and the Mayan Theater, both of which are architecturally significant buildings that provided the kind of grand, slightly deteriorated urban backdrop that the filmmakers needed to capture the feeling of a neighborhood that had seen better days. These theaters, with their ornate facades and vintage signage, helped create the visual impression that any ghetto, USA was a place where the glamorous past of the 1970s had given way to the harsher realities of the 1980s. By combining these various Los Angeles locations, the production was able to create a fictional neighborhood that felt authentic and lived in, while also serving the comedic needs of a film that was both celebrating and poking fun at urban action movies. Fact 15. The original title confusion. Before I'm Gonna Get You Sucka became the final title that audiences know and love, Keenen Ivory Wayans originally planned to call his blaxploitation parody I Mow It You Sucka, which used even more deliberately incorrect grammar to emphasize the film's playful approach to language and its connection to street slang from the 1970s and 80s. This original title was meant to sound like the way someone might actually speak the phrase in casual conversation, but the studio apparently decided that the grammar was either too confusing for general audiences or too difficult for marketing purposes. When they changed the title to I'm Gonna Get You Sucka, the filmmakers probably thought they were making the name clearer and more accessible to mainstream moviegoers, but the new title created its own set of problems because people still weren't sure how to interpret the deliberately misspelled and grammatically incorrect phrasing that was central to the film's comedic identity. The word gonna instead of going to and get instead of get were intentional choices that reflected the casual speech patterns the movie was celebrating, but not everyone understood this stylistic decision. The confusion reached its peak when at least one New York City movie theater completely misunderstood the title and listed the film on their marquee as I'm Going to Get You Sucker, which not only corrected the grammar that was supposed to be incorrect but also changed sucka to sucker, essentially turning the deliberately street-smart title into something that sounded like it could have been written by someone's English teacher. This grammatical correction completely missed the point of what Wayans was trying to achieve with his title, which was to capture the authentic voice and attitude of the characters and culture he was both celebrating and gently mocking. The theater's well-intentioned but misguided attempt to fix the title demonstrates how the film's linguistic playfulness sometimes went over people's heads, even among those who were trying to promote it.